friends, my name is Willow and I'm always wondering why. I'm here to talk about all things true crime. I will discuss a case and hopefully get your thoughts on it, because I'm always a curious little one, as I'm sure you are too. Disclaimer: the following presentation is for mature audiences only. It contains graphic descriptions of crime scenes, adult dialogue, and strong language. Viewer discretion is advised. In the year 2005, covering a time span of only 9 months, the township of Phillipi suffered 16 deaths and 19 rapes. Phillipi is a picturesque farming community located on the outskirts of Cape Town, South Africa. The city has an abundance of fruits and vegetables from the richness of the small town's farmlands and the tireless efforts of its minimum wage farm workers. By observations of the visiting reporters, the substance of abandonment of this rural settlement was immensely evident as soon as they stepped foot into it. From an absolute lack of no infrastructure to no running water or electricity, it brought little to no surprise that the inhabitants characteristically found solace in alcohol consumption as a means of escape from the rigorous work they were subjected to on a daily basis. Phillipi is also very remote from the rest of South Africa. So much that the discovery of dead bodies of the farm workers in their irrigation dams, by the way, this was the first wave of numerous other horrors to be reported, would struggle to get the much necessary traction. Community leader Abe Fransman recalled being visited by some of the people from the farm at his small office from which he did most of his work, reporting that the people were being gruesomely murdered. One of the earliest traceable incidents involved a woman named Bonnie Swartz on the evening of the 2nd of April, 2005. Bonnie was taking a walk in the shop when she was ambushed by a man jumping out of the bushes, already unbuttoning his pants. He pushed her down to the floor and would eventually edge his way out of the ensuing struggle by knocking her out with a rock, after which he took off her clothes, dragged her by the feet to tie her to a tree, and raped her 4 times. Bonnie was in and out of consciousness as the assaults were taking place. Once he was done, he left Bonnie at the scene for dead. Luckily for her, however, she was found and rushed to the hospital, surviving to recount the traumatizing incident in detail. In the same month of April, a woman identified as Elsby could recall being certain that someone was watching her from the shadows as she walked home one night with her boyfriend and her kids. Upon getting home, she discovered her mother, with whom she was living with at the time, was not there. In the following month, on Mother's Day, May 7th, her son and some of his friends, while playing around a dam, would discover a body drawn to the scene by their screams for help. The other community members got there and got the body out, affirming Elsby's darkest fears. Her mother had been murdered. She had been raped and strangled to death, and her body happened to be the 3rd to be discovered in the dam within the span of weeks. In the end of July 2005, 6 more bodies were discovered in the dams. This time, the victims included male farm workers as well, who had reportedly been hacked to death with an axe. Apparently, the predator's targets weren't just limited to women taking strolls by themselves during the evening hours. He was also going after couples, killing the male counterparts first and then raping the women also before killing them. What a sick individual. There wasn't a specific pattern or modus operandi to these killings. Some of his victims had been battered, some had been hacked to death with an axe, others mutilated, others strangled. He, however, didn't kill all of the women he raped. It was believed this was done in a deliberate bid to have them report back to the police and have them know it was the work of a single person, contrary to the prior speculations. All testimonies by the survivors had something in common. Many of the victims could only name him as the Jesus Killer because he apparently had the tattoo of Jesus across his chest. Other sources claimed it was because Jesus was spelled with charcoal across his forehead. Now, the statement he was trying to pass across must have sparked several speculations. Perhaps it was a way of letting his victims know he was in utter and absolute control and there was no chance of them being saved. The people were scared during the day. They couldn't work because of their troubled mind, Abe Franzman would recount during the nights. The iota of relief they could find was in Abe's presence, during which they'd finally be able to get at least a moment's worth of sleep. Between the months of August and September, the killings and rapings would momentarily stop, resulting in the community members letting their guards down. As it was beginning to seem that so-called Jesus Killer had finally gone to ground, normalcy in the activities and spirits were restored. In October, however, the relative calm was abruptly shattered and the mysterious killer struck yet again. The first victim after the momentary break were Miana Manuel and her husband Lucas. Miana and Lucas were fast asleep when the intruder broke in. Lucas was dragged outside and Miana was repeatedly raped in her own home. A key point to note was that the people of the community were mostly drunk at night, and hence the victims were too drunk and dazed to fight back. Terrified and in pain, Miana had no choice but to wait for sunrise before going out to find out what had become of her husband. She would discover his body next to the dam, next to the body of their neighbor. Both of them had been grotesquely mutilated by an axe. Miana Manuel would be the first victim, however, to dispute her assault being carried out by a single individual. In her tendered statement to the police, she claimed her husband had been carried out by 2 other men, while the Jesus Killer had stayed with her. In time, an additional number of 8 people had been murdered, with 6 more rape cases. Community leader Abe kept a close watch on everything happening, keeping tracks of the killings on his wall map, with marked pinpoints indicating where all the bodies had been discovered. He had marked out 14 pinpoints, out of which were only 8 were being investigated by the police. The police claimed they lacked substantial evidence linking to a serial killer, and as a result continued to investigate each case on its merit. They also accused the community leader and visiting reporters of inciting unrest and panic by trying to push agendas of a serial killer just so they could sell a juicy scoop. Meanwhile, the police were on the receiving end of the public anger for their nonchalant approach to the investigations, neglecting potential evidence and not interviewing enough victims. Does that surprise you? The Jesus killer in time would begin taunting the police with letters detailing with drawn maps the locations of bodies they hadn't yet found. He was also leaving messages behind for his victims to come. How scary. This was done following heightened media attention and public sensitization. He wrote multiple letters, some with little maps attached to them. The maps were to lead them to where they would find the next set of victims. He was also leaving messages to his future victims as well, letting them know he was coming for them. He even spray painted a message on the wall directed to a woman named Carrion, in which he referred to her as a bitch and that she should know he would be coming for her definitely soon. True to his words, Carrion would be murdered soon enough. It just beats your imagination how the police couldn't even do that job right. He literally gave you the info. It's like getting cheat cards for an exam and still failing. After 2 days of the police still not discovering Carrion's body, the Jesus killer sent another letter to the police detailing the ins and outs of the murder and describing the location of her body with a map attached to it, rather than directly deliver it to a police station. He dropped it off at the doorstep of a close friend of Carrion's. It was obvious the killer was stalking the inhabitants of Phillipi, gaining information on them, their close associates. He made the intel he had known as a means of taunting and maintaining a tight hold of panic on them. The killer must have gotten such a sick thrill from staying in the minds of Philippi's inhabitants. A killer was at large. That was established, but his exact identity was still this great mystery. He was hungrily hunting them from above, making sure he knew every part of the terrain so he would know the perfect timing to get victims by studying their activities and patterns. He knew when they would set out for work, when they got back, when they congregated to share drinks, everything. He knew everybody, but no one knew who he was. At long last, the police finally admitted there was a serial killer at large and began looking for him. I just can't stop rolling my eyes at the police. In November 2005, the first arrest was made in relation to the crime. It was a man called Stanley Martins. The arrest was made after the police found him walking alone in the bushes. Having records of run-ins with the law did not make matters any better for Stanley. Even though he was innocent, Stanley, who was a small, older man who definitely wasn't physically capable of the gruesome slayings of the Jesus killer. The surviving victims who confirmed he wasn't the killer after the police showed them mugshots. Stanley was also further proven innocent by the lack of evidence linking him to the crimes. Seriously, all the cheats in the world and they couldn't find the right person? The wrongful arrest was the tipping point at which every bit of confidence in the police was lost by the public. The group of police in charge of the case was ordered to step down, and a new set headed by Captain Morris was assigned to the case. Finally, in 1 month, Captain Morris would go on to get more leads than previous officers did within 8 months. Captain Morris tackled the case with a formulated strategy that involved revisiting every single crime scene and interviewing every single victim. In December 2005, the police would encounter a final breakthrough. This one landing them directly to the Jesus Killer. While revisiting one of the crime scenes, Captain Morris found a cell phone that definitely did not belong to the corresponding victim. He was able to unlock the phones and access the call logs, where he had come to discover the most contacted number. The number belonged to a boy named Daryl, who lived in Grasbow. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Daryl told them that the phone and number belonged to his father, Jimmy McCata, who was out on parole for attempted murder. He also gave the police his father's address, but upon reaching the address, they discovered Jimmy had long moved out. This didn't discourage the police, as they didn't relent in their search, eventually track down and arrest Jimmy McCata in Mitchell's Plain, where he had a painting job. Jimmy McCata was born between 1964 and 1965. He was one of 15 children, and his family was really poor. Apart from being poor, it was noted that they were also very dysfunctional and abusive. Best chances were unhealthy environment have somewhat rubbed off on Jimmy, because even as a child, it was reported that he was pretty violent, always getting into fights with other kids, committed arson on several occasions, and even engaged in some acts of bestiality. That's the serial killer trifecta right there. Jimmy ran away from his family home. He lived in the bushes for a while, where he initially started off doing some petty crimes before gradually moving on to some more serious crimes. At some point, he stayed at his sister's apartment at Mitchell's Plain for a short while. He went back to his hometown in Grasbow, where he had spent most of his life, and met a woman named Janetta, with whom he'd fall in love with, get married to, and they would even have children together. They got married in the 80s, after which Jimmy's behavior took an ugly change. He became abusive to his new family. Their union had been blessed with 3 children. Janetta recounted some extremely abusive incidents vividly. On one occasion, he had stabbed her in the head. On another, he beat her up using the branch of a tree, going as far as breaking her leg. For reasons of still loving him, however, Janetta remained with him. Janetta found out Jimmy was having an affair. This prompted her to leave him finally, and forbid him from ever returning to their home or seeing their children. So this guy beats you, makes your life a living hell, almost kills you, not to mention the horror your kids have to witness, but you only leave when he cheats? Let's just be glad she actually left. Imagine the horror those kids had to witness and worry about. Jimmy would cite his divorce with Janetta as a major reason why he went on his assault rampage. Though he was initially hesitant, denying the allegations when he was brought to the police custody, he eventually had no option but to yield, however, in the face of undeniable evidence, including, as previously stated, his cell phone and written letters. He was linked to the murders and rapes by DNA tests, cell phone data, trips that he had made with the police to point out murder scenes where the bodies were found, and handwriting samples. Our children are very shocked, Janetta says. Even the eldest son, Daryl, he asked me, "Mummy, how could you marry such a man?" Makeda spent hours looking over the hill at possible victims. His targets, as per his confession, were drunk people. Half of the time, victims would be so intoxicated that they wouldn't even realize they had been sexually assaulted. He also made sure to attack them at night. So not only would they not see him coming, but they would not be able to identify him either in court. Makeda would plead guilty. He was convicted of 47 crimes. 19 of those charges were for rape. 16 were for murder. 6 charges were for housebreaking. There were 3 for assaults, 1 for kidnapping, 1 for theft, and the last one left was for attempted murder. Psychological tests were run, and Makeda was officially diagnosed mentally deranged. It was nonetheless a no-brainer, seeing as he had long exhibited psychopath tendencies as far back as his childhood years. He is a mild-mannered, soft-spoken, and pleasant-looking, but he lacks remorse. When I asked what he felt about all this, he just shrugged his shoulders. The state psychologist who ran the test explained this viewpoint was also agreed on by the corresponding judge. I had instances when I spoke with him. His demeanor was that of a soft-spoken, docile type of man. Somebody whom, if you passed on the streets, you couldn't think would hurt a fly. One of the reasons Makeda was a soft-spoken, docile man. Somebody whom, if you passed on the streets, you'd think he couldn't hurt a fly. One of the reasons Makeda was absolutely exempted from the chances of release was due to this diagnosis. Apart from this, his apathy during the confession in court was disturbing. Makeda knew the family of the people he murdered were in attendance. He, however, showed no visible signs of genuine remorse. This lack of remorse was either an indicator of his psychopathic tendencies or just proof that he was a vile-minded sicko who never deserved to see the light of day before his final sentencing. While the court had been adjourned for an hour, a shackle-bound Makeda would be seen smiling in the face of verbal lashings from the families of his victims. According to the psychologist, if Makeda was allowed out at any point, there was a high chance he would continue with rape and murder. He saw himself as a lion who would come out to take care of his needs. It was Jesus' way to make him powerful and all-being. Claims made by Makeda to be a changed man who was ready to make atonement for his sins were taken with a pinch of salt, of course. The people of Phillipi weren't having any of it. On 2 occasions, Makeda had even telephoned the police radio control to inform the police where bodies could be found. Morris said Makeda had also written to the Sun and the Voice newspapers to say he was responsible for murders. He also wrote to me to thank me for the way I had treated him. In this letter, he says no matter what happens to him, he always wants to stay in touch with me. There is zero possibility of him being rehabilitated. It's hopeless. If a person has killed so many victims, it's impossible to say he's not dangerous, said the state psychologist. At the end of the verdict was life imprisonment. Though they must have been pleased to see justice get served, his sentencing would be nowhere near enough gratification to make up for the loss of their dear ones. On the bright side, however, the people of Phillipi could finally feel safe and secure once again. Abe, the community leader, maintained his stance that if the case had been taken seriously from the onset by the first set of assigned policemen, there wouldn't have been this many murders or rapes. He attributed this lack of care to the fact that the farm people were the poorest people. To an extent, this lack of regard persisted as the claims of sightings two more accomplices were never investigated till date. They may still be walking free. The rapings and killings ceased totally, proving, however, that Makata was the mastermind behind them all. Makata's final act from prison was sending a 3-page long letter to his estranged wife, where he actually blamed the frustration of her leaving him and him never getting a chance to see her children to be what had pushed him into doing everything he'd done. Janetta, when you left me, I was in and out of prison. That is when the sickness began taking over me. Like a lion tiger, it grew inside from the time you left me. I hated men and women. Tell my children that I am not dead. I am alive, and they will one day see me again, he notably said in the 3-page long letter. Well, we hope Janetta could, if anything, call this silliness to his claims. We'd hate to imagine what would become of the world if every estranged husband resorted to becoming bush-residing, cold, calculating sickos that raped and killed harmless people who had never done them any wrong in such a gruesome fashion. Several movies as well as several documentaries have been adapted from the acts and the case of the Jesus Killer. Be sure to check one out. It's pretty interesting. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so I can keep making these videos. Check out my other videos and never stop wondering and asking why. Stay safe and stay happy. Always yours, Love, Willow. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.